On tonight's summary of the Israel-Hamas War, Day 164. The Israeli delegation arrived in Qatar to begin the hostage negotiations. Negotiations in this round are expected to last at least 2 weeks. The IDF is continuing its operation in the al-Shifa hospital in Gaza City. Hamas's head of internal security operations in the entire Gaza Strip was killed in the compound. The United States announces that Marwan Issa, number 3 in the Hamas leadership in the Gaza Strip, was successfully assassinated last week. In Israel, there is still hesitation about making such a public announcement. A UN report published today states that 70% of Palestinians in northern Gaza Strip are in catastrophic food insecurity. Famine conditions are expected to develop in the coming months. U.S. President Biden spoke on the phone with Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu for the first time in over a month. Israel has reportedly agreed to send a delegation to Washington, D.C. to present the plans for its impending Rafah invasion. Hello everyone, I'm Alon Burstein, visiting assistant professor in the Department of Political Science and Israel Institute Fellow at the University of California, Irvine, here bringing you the summary of the last 24 hours of the Israel-Hamas War. It is currently the evening of March 18, 2024 in the United States, the morning of March 19, 2024 in the Middle East. Starting with the hostage situation, the Israeli delegation to negotiations, which includes the head of the Israeli Mossad, Dadi Barnea, and the IDF general in charge of the hostage situation, Nitzan Alon, arrived in Qatar on Monday. While Barnea is going to return to Israel tomorrow, the teams are going to remain in place for negotiations that are expected to last at least 2 weeks. As a reminder, the main points of contention being debated between the sides are not only the amount of Palestinian prisoners that will be released in exchange for each Israeli hostage, but more importantly the identity of these prisoners, with Hamas demanding that it is going to decide which prisoners are released, and Israel wanting to have a say or be able to veto some of these decisions. And in addition to this, Hamas's demand that there will be complete freedom of movement for Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, including to the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, during the truce. In addition to the distance between the positions and the demands that both Israel and Hamas are making, it was reported today that the negotiations are going to be very slow due to technical limitations as well. The Israeli delegation has a limited mandate to negotiate, and while the head of the Mossad stated that this mandate that was given by the War Cabinet is enough to begin negotiations, General Nitzan Alon reportedly feels that the mandate is too narrow and Israel cannot effectively get a deal with this wiggle room in negotiations. On the other side, Hamas's Gaza leadership has become more involved in the negotiations as well, and while technically the external leadership of Hamas is the one that's negotiating in Qatar, it in fact cannot accept or reject anything without approval from the internal leadership, and according to some reports, getting messages between the external leadership and Yahya Sinwar in the Gaza Strip sometimes takes between 24 to 36 hours, and thus the negotiations are going to technically take a long time, regardless of if either side can come towards the middle and find some sort of compromise. In addition to this, while it was not reported what exactly the mandate that was given to the Israeli negotiating team was and what the limitations are, there are political complications with this as well. It was reported today that Israel's Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich and National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir, respectively leaders of Religious Zionism Party and Jewish Power Party, have stated that they will leave the government if dozens of quote-unquote heavy Palestinian prisoners are released. That will add another complication if even a deal is reached, how this is going to work politically within Israel. Amidst this, while the United States is reporting cautious optimism and stating that all sides are feeling international pressure to reach a deal, the Wall Street Journal published a report today stating that negotiating countries have informed Israel that the current round of negotiations is considered the last round of negotiations, and if a deal is not reached during this round, i.e. these talks however long they take, then negotiation talks are going to come to an end. Moving on to the ongoing fighting in the Gaza Strip, there were no rockets or mortars sent from the Gaza Strip towards Israel in the last 24 hours. Regarding the fighting in the Gaza Strip, the largest amount of news is coming out from the al-Shifa hospital raid that the IDF is carrying out in Gaza City. In the al-Shifa hospital, the IDF has completely taken over the facility after gun battles were reported in different parts. Reports are varying between 80 to 200 Hamas operatives and other terror operatives that the IDF has arrested, and 20 Hamas operatives were reported killed in the different gun battles. Al-Qassam brigades also reported about these gun battles, stating that its fighters were engaging IDF soldiers within the al-Shifa compound. Among those killed is a senior Hamas official, Faik al-Mavhoh. He's the head of the internal operations of Hamas's internal security division for the entire Gaza Strip. According to reports in the Al-Aqsa news channel, which is one of the Hamas affiliates in the Gaza Strip, al-Mavhoh, who is the brother of Hamas operative Mahmoud al-Mavhoh, who was assassinated in Dubai in 2010, was sent to the northern parts of the Gaza Strip in the last several weeks in order to oversee Hamas's security operations of humanitarian aid trucks in the area. The IDF stated in turn that he was sent to the north in order to ensure that local Palestinians do not cooperate with the IDF and facilitate the entrance of aid trucks, and in addition that he was likely behind the recent execution of the Mukhtar of the Dagmash family that I reported about on March 15th, on accusations that family was coordinating the entrance of aid trucks with the IDF. In addition to this, substantial weaponry was also reportedly found in the hospital thus far, as well as money that Hamas was distributing to its operatives within the entire compound area. Palestinian sources also reported that the IDF is operating in a school housing internally displaced people near the hospital, and several people were arrested within this compound as well. The IDF spokesperson Daniel Hagari stated today that al-Shifa has been monitored for a long time by the IDF intelligence, and that Hamas commanders fled to the hospital and made it their new headquarters yet again in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip. In addition to all this, the IDF spokesperson in Arabic called upon Palestinian civilians both in al-Shifa hospital and in the Rimal regions of Gaza City to begin evacuating the area and head to designated humanitarian safe zones in the al-Muasi region, that is further south, north of Rafah. Leaflets were distributed along these inside these areas as well, indicating that the IDF may plan on expanding its operation both in al-Shifa hospital as well as, more largely, in the Rimal area of Gaza City. Other news about fighting in the Gaza Strip. Alongside the operation in al-Shifa hospital, gun battles were also reported in nearby regions in the outskirts of Deir al-Balah. There was no report about if this fighting actually was associated with the al-Shifa operation, or if it is just someone nearby, possibly it is people fleeing the area. There are no reports as of now. In the southern parts of the Gaza Strip, in Rafah, the Wafa news agency reported a series of IDF attacks that were carried out in the region. According to the report, 2 houses and an apartment were attacked in the areas of Musbah, Hirbat al-Adas, as well as al-Janina, killing 14 Palestinians. No reports were made about the targets yet from the IDF. We may hear about this in the coming days. Often the IDF waits to see who in fact was killed in the different attacks before reporting what was targeted. Other news related to the Gaza Strip. The United States National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan stated today that Israel had successfully assassinated number 3 in Hamas's internal leadership, Marwan Issa. This is the first public confirmation of the success of the assassination, which was carried out over a week ago. In Israel, senior officials responded, stating that while it is highly likely that Issa is dead, until this is 100% confirmed, the country is being cautious with making any public statements about this. In yesterday's summary, I discussed why possibly Israel and Hamas are procrastinating about confirming his death, as they may be at a quote-unquote race over who will recover Issa's body from the tunnel that was bombed out. If you want to learn more about this, you can look at yesterday's summary for this elaboration. In addition to this, the National Security Advisor Sullivan also reported on an agreement that was reached today between U.S. President Biden and Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu during their phone conversation. This is the first conversation that the two leaders have had in over a month, and reportedly large parts of the call focused on the impending IDF invasion of Rafah. Sullivan stated that Biden expressed grave concerns and that, quote, a ground invasion on Rafah will be a mistake and will lead to civilian casualties, a worse humanitarian situation, deepen anarchy in Gaza, and further ostracize Israel internationally. Sullivan added that Biden asked Netanyahu to send officials to D.C. from the military, intelligence, and humanitarian aid officials to hear about the planned operation in Rafah and discuss alternatives as well. Netanyahu reportedly agreed to this, and the two have scheduled another phone conversation either for this weekend or for the beginning of next week, and have agreed that no large-scale operation will occur in Rafah before they speak again. Regarding casualties, 1 IDF soldier is reported killed in the last 24 hours in the Gaza Strip, bringing the total number of IDF soldiers killed since the invasion began to 250. 2 IDF soldiers reported injured in the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours, bringing the total number of IDF soldiers injured in the Gaza Strip since the invasion began to 1,482. The Palestinian Health Ministry in the Gaza Strip is reporting that 81 Palestinians were killed in the Gaza Strip in the last 24 hours, bringing the total number of Palestinians who were killed in the Gaza Strip since the war began to 31,726. 73,792 Palestinians reported injured in the Gaza Strip since the war began, and there's still several thousand Palestinians that are buried under the rubble and presumed dead. Moving on to the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip. The Integrated Food Security Phase Classification, this is a classification of hunger conditions in the world under the UN agencies and operates 12 UN agencies throughout the world, published a report today about the hunger conditions in the Gaza Strip. Among others, it states that over 1 million people in the Strip are in a state of emergency or catastrophic food insecurity and are in imminent danger of famine. It adds that in the northern parts of the Gaza Strip, 70% of Palestinians are in this stage, and the report adds that things are expected to deteriorate between March and May, and other parts of the report say in different parts of the Gaza Strip between March and July, leading to widespread conditions of famine. Responding to this, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres stated that this is a horrific indictment against the horrendous civilian conditions on the ground, adding that this is a man-made disaster, and emphasizing the report also shows ways that this situation can be alleviated and what can be done about the situation. The EU Foreign Minister Joseph Borrell also stated again that Israel is using hunger as a weapon of war, and UNRWA Director Philip Lazzarini stated that UNRWA is trying to alleviate the situation under terrible conditions, adding that Israel has forbade him from entering the Gaza Strip. There were no reports made regarding the entrance of aid trucks into the Gaza Strip. There were also no specific reports made about the paradropping of humanitarian aid. That does not mean that humanitarian aid did not enter. Usually these reports are done by different forces on the ground before they are confirmed internationally, and most of the forces on the ground right now, at least the reporters, are reporting on the situation in al-Shifa hospital, so it is possible that more paradropping of aid did occur. However, this was not reported. Moving on to the West Bank, there was substantial IDF activity reported in various different areas of the West Bank in the last 24 hours. These included in the areas of the Haisha refugee camp near Bethlehem, Yatta near Hebron, Hawara, Baitunia, and El-Bira near Ramallah, as well as several other smaller villages. A total of 14 Palestinians were reported arrested in the West Bank in the last 24 hours, and more were reportedly held for questioning in the field. Guns and other weaponry were also confiscated in these different raids. In addition to this, Palestinian sources stated that one of the people who were arrested in the Daesh refugee camp is Rauda Abu Ajmiya, who is an operative of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. She was released in the previous hostage deal between Israel and Hamas, and has now been arrested again. Other news, Fadwa Barghouti, the wife of Marwan Barghouti, arguably the quote-unquote heaviest, most popular Palestinian prisoner in Israel, stated that her husband was assaulted in prison while he was being moved between facilities. While the Israeli prison authorities stated that such allegations are not known, however, that they will be looked into, this has a lot of explosive potential. Barghouti is widely popular in the Palestinian streets. According to many polls, he would win an election to be the next chairman of the Palestinian Authority, and if in fact it does come out that he was assaulted, or even if it does not come out or not confirmed, but if the rumors spread far enough, this has a lot of explosive potential in the West Bank, specifically during Ramadan. Other news related to the West Bank. The EU declared its unanimous decision to impose sanctions on violent settlers in the West Bank. It was not reported what the sanctions were going to include exactly, or how many settlers would be included in the list, which will likely be formulated in a meeting of the EU on Thursday. Some reports stated that the sanctions will likely include denying entrance to the EU, freezing assets, and forbidding business ties with the settlers under sanction and EU citizens. Hamas senior leaders were also sanctioned as part of this agreement. Responding to this, Israel's finance minister Bezalel Smotrich stated that this move is the result of an infamous BDS campaign trying to deface the entirety of Israel, adding that Israel's response must be strengthening the settlement project across the entire land of Israel. Moving on to the northern parts of Israel, southern parts of Lebanon. There were barrages of rockets fired from Lebanon targeting the northern parts of Israel today, however less than the escalations that we saw in the last several weeks. Rockets targeted the areas of Kibbutz Yiftach, Hardov, Menara. There was also an aerial target that was intercepted in the Hula Valley, and Hezbollah claimed responsibility for at least 4 border incidents. This is usually shooting attacks against different IDF outposts. Regarding IDF activity, IDF warplanes reportedly attacked a Hezbollah structure in the Misal Jabal area after Hezbollah operatives were identified entering it, and a military structure in the El Adaisa region as well. Earlier in the day, lookout posts were targeted in the Kila village and in the areas of Ramia, and in Ramia, Hezbollah military structure was also targeted in a later attack. In addition to this, Hezbollah infrastructure was also attacked in the areas of Anakora. Al-Manar reported that IDF attacks were also carried out in the areas of Ita Sha'ab, Hanin, and Hula. Al-Mianin also reported artillery fire in the Misal Jabal area, while Al-Manar also stated that the Lebanese military conducted a controlled explosion of a missile that the IDF had fired in the areas of Misal Jabal, however it had not exploded. Meanwhile, in Syria, in the last several hours, 2 Syrian opposition outlets, the Human Rights Observatory and the Voice of the Capital Radio, reported IDF attacks in the outskirts of Damascus. Some reports stated that the attacks targeted military outposts in the El Kalmon region. However, up until now, there has been no official report either from Syria or from the IDF regarding this attack, so we will likely learn more about this tomorrow. Moving on to some of the regional developments, the U.S. Central Command reported attacks against the Houthis in Yemen in the last several hours. According to reports, the attack targeted 7 nautical missile launchers and 3 uncrewed sea vessels. Political news with regards to the regional situation. In a special session of the UN Security Council, severe condemnation of the Houthis and their nautical attacks was published, enumerating the deaths that have been caused by these attacks, and calling upon all countries to cooperate to stop the Houthis from obtaining weaponry. It is important to note that while the UN Security Council issued this heavy condemnation, there were no sanctions that were actually imposed, and no threats were made regarding countries that do not abide by this call. Moving on to some of the political and general trends from the last 24 hours. As I stated above, there was a first phone conversation between Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and the U.S. President Biden that happened for the first time the two have spoken for over a month. In Israel, Prime Minister Netanyahu put out a recorded message after the conversation, stating that the two leaders spoke about the latest developments in the war, adding, and I quote, "This includes Israel's obligation to achieve all of the war's aims, destroying Hamas, releasing our hostages, and guaranteeing that Gaza is no longer a threat to Israel, while providing humanitarian aid that helps facilitate attaining these goals." In turn, in the United States, it was reported that President Biden primarily spoke to Netanyahu about the concerns regarding the invasion of Rafah and the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip, and as I said, that Israel has agreed to send a delegation to the United States in order to present the administration with the plans for Rafah and also hear about our alternatives. In addition to this, the U.S. National Security Advisor Sullivan stated in a press conference that Prime Minister Netanyahu raised with Biden Chuck Schumer's speech and other facets that were reported in the U.S. media, but that Biden responded that this is not a question of politics and statements, but rather a question of policy and strategy, and that is not the purpose of the call. Responding to a question, Sullivan stated that while the United States is in fact being accused of intervening in Israel's internal politics, he answered, and I quote, "This does not come close to how much they intervene in our internal politics." In addition to this, prior to their conversation, Netanyahu spoke via video conference to an AIPAC convention. He stated there that the story being told in the United States is not real, and that, quote, "If you walk down the streets into a mall or into a taxi and speak to the actual people, the vast majority of Israelis will tell you that they support the goals of my government and how the government is trying to achieve them." Other political news. The Canadian Parliament is going to vote on an NDP proposal to both recognize the Palestinian state, as well as to suspend all military and technological connections between Canada and Israel. It's important to note that even if this proposal passes, it will not obligate the Canadian government, and the Canadian Foreign Minister specifically stated that this will have no effect on Canada's foreign policy. Minister Gantz also spoke with the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau before this vote and expressed Israel's disapproval of unilateral decisions of recognizing a Palestinian state. Other political news. Israel's response to South Africa's ICJ request for emergency injunctions due to the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip was submitted today. The response, 21 pages in total, rejects South Africa's allegations and states that South Africa is trying to get political attention by repeatedly asking for more emergency injunctions that are repeatedly being rejected. The response also includes a list of measures that Israel has undertaken in order to allow humanitarian aid to enter the Gaza Strip by land, sea, and air, emphasizing the amount of times that Israel has declared that there is no limit to the amount of humanitarian aid that can enter the Gaza Strip, and the steps that Israel has done to facilitate this. Regarding the future of the Gaza Strip, reporting on the Biden-Netanyahu conversation, the U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan stated also that Biden repeatedly emphasized that while the United States supports Israel's right to attack Hamas, the military operation must have a long-term strategy, specifically stating, "We share the goal of defeating Hamas, but we need to see a plan and a coherent strategy to make this happen in the long run as well." So this again relates to the U.S. pressure on Israel to come up with a quote-unquote day-after plan regarding how the Gaza Strip is going to be run, what is going to happen if and when Hamas is in fact destroyed. In Israel, there's been no concrete plans that have been developed. Prime Minister Netanyahu presented one segment of a plan that was just over a page long. I will add that I'm going to put out a video in the coming days summarizing this plan and what, at least officially, Israel's strategy is in the war. If you enjoyed these reports, please do remember to give them a like, subscribe, turn on notifications if you want to know when reports come out. If you have questions or comments, leave them in the comment section below. That is my report for the last 24 hours. I'll be back tomorrow.